it's a great area of study for event marketers to get into, because I think using the tools that exist in behavioral science can really help us to either develop or bolster existing strategies that we might have, help us predict the behavior of our target audiences, and therefore better cater to what they're looking for, and maybe even influence that behavior just slightly. Influence, not control, but gentle nudges.
Hello and welcome to the Events Cast. How are you doing today? I am Francesca, your host, and that what you just heard was a clip from today's episode with Siri Brudevold, who is the Global Events Manager at Brompton Bicycle. And that was just such a great part of this episode, and where that came from, there is so much more. This episode has got such a great vibe, it's super hyped, and it's a conversation I thoroughly enjoyed with Siri. Today, we're talking about behavioral science. And we're talking about how behavioral science, how psychology can really help you build memorable events for your audience, how it can help you build a sense of urgency, exclusivity, how it can help you get more survey fillings, how it can help you get more registrations for your event. Siri really shares a lot of detail with me in this episode. She shares so many great strategies, so many great tips, so many great action points, which you will be able to take away from this episode and start incorporating your event. So listen right to the end. She does give you a challenge right there at the end, so make sure you don't miss that and action it afterwards. It is a great one. And we do have a lot to cover here today, so without any further ado, I'm just going to click the intro and we can go right into this episode. Welcome to the Events Cast, a podcast to help event professionals attract more attendees and grow their events. Through weekly interviews with event professionals and solo episodes with myself, you'll learn practical tips and strategies to better market your events. I'm your host, Francesca Bellit, and I'm the co-founder of BBR Web Design and a marketing coach, helping event producers achieve their marketing goals with a conversion-optimized event website. If you need support with your event websites or marketing, visit theeventscast.com to check out how we can work together. And while you're there, explore some of the freebies made just for you. And now for today's episode. Hello, Siri, and welcome to the Events Cast. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thanks. Happy to be here.
I'm really happy to have you here. I'm really excited about this conversation. I was mentioning a bit to you just before we hit the record that I've been intending to have you on the show for a while now, so I'm really, really excited we're finally doing this. And I'm really excited to be talking about behavioral science with you. It is a topic which I must admit I'm not a big expert in, but it really, really fascinates me. We have already touched on it actually on another episode, probably about 6 months back here in the show. So we have already dived slightly into it, and I'm really excited to hear your take on the topic. And we're going to go into all the detail in a minute, but just before we go there, before we talk about the detail of behavioral science in events, we'd love to just hear a bit your background story and how you got into the lovely world of events.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like just like everybody else who suddenly finds himself in events, it was kind of an accident. I started out my professional life with an English literature degree, so kind of a far field away from where I started. But I think through a funnel of various random jobs, I found myself in events, and I love problem solving. I love the adrenaline. I love the satisfaction that is unmatched, when you get to see months and months of work sort of physically get built in front of you, and you really get to immerse yourself in the work that you've done. And I love a bit of drama too, and something always goes wrong, right? So it's good fun. There's never a dull moment, working in events, that's for sure.
I really feel you, and I will say that rush is what drew me into events at the beginning and what keeps me here. I always sometimes think of also just marketing in other senses, and I just feel like I couldn't do it like to market a product or just something so steady and, like you say, with so less drama, or just the timelines that we run through in events is just what keeps me excited every day. And tell me, where does this whole concept of behavioral science or psychology, where does that come into your life? Of like, I know it's something that you're using, incorporating in your events nowadays. Where's that come from?
Just honestly, a bit of curiosity. So as I've kind of become, gotten a few more years of experience under my belt, I've sort of naturally started to learn a little bit more about, fields in marketing that are outside of events. And sort of through that, research and exposure, I've kind of found behavioral science as like this really interesting niche, that I think is really helpful to apply to experiential marketing and kind of all areas of marketing, to be honest. But I will also say, I am not an expert either. I am not a scientist. I'm just, an enthusiast. So take everything I say today with a big grain of salt.
No, I mean, it doesn't, many times you don't need to be experienced that. I mean, it's just like great to hear, yeah, where it's come from for you and really how, yeah, you like dipping your foot into it. I feel like most of us in event marketing, it mostly is about that, trying things, trying new strategies, new channels out there, and just seeing really what works for you. And that's why it's like great to hear a bit your story and understand a bit like what you have been trying out, what has been working, and really why it really interests you. So if we just take it from the top, really from that, like, I mean, obviously you've already got into it, but for like someone who hasn't really explored or even really thought about this topic much of behavioral science, and they're hearing us talk about it here, how would you define it, or what is it for you really, and how do you use it like in events?
Yeah. So, I mean, brass tacks, like at its most basic level, behavioral science is the study of human behavior, right? And it's great because it's this melting pot of various different areas of study, right? From psychology and sociology to things like economics and much more, you know, math based worlds like cognitive science, which, I'm a little bit afraid to touch on, but that's in the mix too. And it's really about trying to uncover the why behind, how people make decisions, how they interact with other people, why they interact with their environments the way they do. Um, and I think it's a great area of study for event marketers to get into, because I think using the tools that exist in behavioral science can really help us to either develop or bolster existing strategies that we might have, help us predict the behavior of our target audiences, and therefore better cater to what they're looking for, and maybe even influence that behavior just slightly. Influence, not control, but, gentle nudges.
Influence. I mean, that's what it's all about, really, in marketing, isn't it? Every step we do is about really influencing them to take a decision. So, I mean, it just sounds so logic to really be applying like the mind to influence them further. And just before we talk a bit about like a bit what you said there, of like tools or how you incorporate it to influence them, since you've been dipping your foot into behavioral science, which I don't know how long it's been so far, but that is part of the question. Like, how long have you maybe been like trying it out? And really, like, since you have been starting using it, what results have you really been seeing for your events or for your marketing? Is there anything like outstanding so far that any results you've got to share?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because, in terms of sort of granular, ROI numbers, that's quite hard to see the impact. But when it comes to the squishier metrics of events, right, like things like retention or repeat attendance, or things like NPS scores, how you perform on social in terms of engagement and things like that, all those softer metrics about customer loyalty and things like that, that's where I think behavioral science techniques really make a difference. And again, it's always going to be a battle of inches as opposed to, major wins. But if you're doing things over and over again, repeat events, if you do one this year with absolutely no behavioral science in your arsenal, and then do the exact same event but tweak it so that it matches elements of the research that is out there for you to absorb, I think you will genuinely see an uptick in at least consumer reception and satisfaction.
Awesome. So is that what how you would like how you started, or how you would recommend like someone starting off of like starting to just like try small little bits, incorporating small changes like for everyone? Is that how maybe you started?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, to be honest with you, I started just by asking, some questions of myself, right? So, especially at my role at Brompton Bicycle, I did not come into this job because I am a bicycle enthusiast or anything like that. So it was a brand new audience for me to sort of try to get into the heads of. And so it's really about asking questions around, what does your audience value? How do they see themselves? And what are their preferences when it comes to experiential marketing, right? And then asking yourself, your teams, your senior stakeholders, well, off the back of that, what does a successful event look like? How do you want them to feel, walking through the doors or after they've left? And what actions do you want them to take once they've sort of wrapped up the event and they're back at home? Um, and and in addition to that, if you are closing the book on an event and you're sort of thinking, how do we improve for the next one? Behavioral science, I think, can really help you with areas that you've struggled to, right? Like if your click-through rates were way lower than expected, well, then maybe you can use some tools in behavioral science to sort of help get those people to take action based on the language you use in your call to actions and things like that. There's a plethora of things out there for you to sort of dig into, but I think it genuinely does start with asking yourself some questions.
Yeah, because like you said there, I love how you mentioned that you started about it thinking about yourself. Because yeah, I mean, it's one of these weird things, isn't it, that we're all like human and we all react to the same things, but we also don't. We're not so aware to of them, and it's not something like you so know. And we're all controlled by other brands by certain triggers like this, but it's an interesting one to put yourself in your own position. So, like now we've got a bit like the context there and what's not there. What's some of those triggers then that you'd use? Maybe let's take it like that. I know you mentioned a few stages there for your event, like a bit before the event and during at the event and even after, and what you want to do them. Let's take a bit by steps here. So maybe just like until the moment people get to the event, what some of the triggers that you have maybe incorporated to make sure people get there, to people sign up, and that your audience does come to your event.
Yeah, definitely. So I think before the event, and I kind of touched on it a little bit, is language really matters in your comms ahead of the event. And I mean, I'm preaching to the choir a little bit. I'm sure we all know that, right? But behavioral science lets you sort of dig into actual, studies that can help guide specific language choices. And I think part of the reason that's really interesting for me is because I have that sort of English literature background. So it's kind of fun to be able to dip my toes back into that world occasionally. But it's been proven that when you have meaningful calls to action that are specific, and allow your audience to do something that they really value, and that they know how to do, makes a difference. So like one example would be if you're doing a fundraiser or something like that, for, I don't know, if you're puppies, right? You're trying to get 45 puppies adopted through a fundraising event, right? People are going to be much more likely to click to sign up more, or to donate, or to buy tickets or a table or whatever, if you phrase it as help us get Fido adopted, as opposed to help us get 45 puppies adopted, right? Because it's specific. They can feel like they're making a difference. They understand what you're trying to get them to do. Whereas it's overwhelming to think about getting 45 different puppies adopted. And so they're much less likely to engage with that call to action.
That's very interesting. I love how you say like the specific, and the example just really pictures it so nicely in there. So thanks for that. So obviously we're talking about the language there, being really specific, being just right to the point. Is there anything you like use ahead of the event, or that you've tried out maybe of like to build that exclusivity, or like I know with there's a lot of conversations in events of like urgency and don't miss out, FOMO, all these lovely trigger words. Have you utilized anything down that line?
Yes, definitely. And FOMO and building urgency and all that, that's actually a definable principle in behavioral science, and it's known as the scarcity principle. And when people think that something is scarce or, rare or expensive or hard to get their hands on for any reason, they value it more, and it kind of drives them to move faster or pay a little bit more or things like that. And so yes, when we do sort of early release to our communities for ticket sales, we find that that works really well because that limited time or limited quantity or even things like exclusive access areas for your VIPs or exclusive content tracks for your community members. All of that really helps sort of get them over the line and buy that ticket or buy that VIP ticket, right? So yes, that definitely works and is backed by science.
I mean, I always love to talk about it because I'm a massive FOMO sufferer. I suffer it all around my life with anything to do. So I do love to also really utilize it, triggering my audience, because I know there are people that don't suffer as much from, but I think we all do. There are obviously us sufferers who really do suffer it more and others, but I do love to utilize it myself. Obviously, there's a few like with scarcity and offers, there are a few like the obvious ones that always go around in events of like the early bird tickets and just the price tiers and stuff. I love some of those ones you've mentioned there, also of the VIP or like an early release. Are there any other like strategies around there that you've utilized for any of your events that have like worked really well and a bit different or a bit like newer to the story?
Yeah, so I think I lean into elements that really help, especially at Brompton, where community is such a big part of who we are as a brand. It's really important to help those attendees feel like they have a sense of ownership and attachment to the events that we're putting on. And again, that has, surprise, surprise, a name under the consumer. The behavioral science industry, and it's known as the endowment effect. And it sort of stipulates that people are a lot more unwilling to part with what they feel like they own as soon as they've fostered an attachment to whatever that thing is. And that attachment can take seconds, right? You don't have to spend hours of time like letting them test out a product or things like that. It's seconds. So it's as much as, hey, vote on the speaker we're going to have on site, right? And then suddenly they feel like they've had a stake in what's going on, and so they're much more invested, much more willing to buy that ticket, and much more likely to attend, right? Your attrition rates will drop when you give your audience members that sense of ownership.
That's really interesting. I love that. And do you do that only with then like also people have already registered, but you're trying to get them to come to actually to the event, or even to like people before they've registered, and like maybe of a social media community or people before they've registered for exclusive event?
Well, for now, it's just for the folks who've registered because we want to award their, participation, and then make them feel like the event truly is the community's to own and take away, right? But there's nothing to say that we can't expand those circles, right? And if we want to open the doors and widen our audience scope, then that is definitely something that I'm going to use in the future for sure.
Awesome. And these are obviously some of the things that we could do like before the event. What happens like more at the event daily? Is there any like triggers that you use at the event to make their experience better and maybe like make them come back to the next ones or increase that brand loyalty?
Yeah, so things go wrong at events, right? All the time. Like this goes wrong. The speaker's late. The weather's crap, and it's an outdoor festival. All of this stuff, and I think there again is a behavioral science tool that can really help mitigate those risks and communicate with your audiences in a way that does foster loyalty and advocacy for your brand. And it's known as the pratfall effect, and it basically stipulates that, I know it's a silly name, it basically means like a small fall on your rear end, right? Like that's what that means. And it's a phenomenon where people are much more likely to view you favorably if you admit to the small mistakes you make. And I will say that this also applies in job interviews. If anybody's going through that right now, if you're not perfect, that's actually better for your case. But it applies in the events world as well, right? Like owning up to the small errors that happen along the way make you more trustworthy and relatable to your consumers, and really increase that loyalty that we're all striving for. I will say with that one though, it's a little bit goes a long way, right? Because you don't want your audience to feel like you're incompetent. So it's kind of like playing with fire a little bit, but when it's used right. And my favorite example is actually doesn't come from events. But it comes from the advertising world. I don't know if you remember when KFC ran out of chicken in the UK. And they had this whole advertising campaign built around like, oops, sorry guys, we ran out of chicken. And it was funny and engaging and relatable. And it kind of helped them overcome that sort of mega mess up on their part in the UK. So it definitely works and people are using it. So
I really actually like that. And I'm thinking of so many ideas right now on the back of my head of like so many events that I've been at, organizing myself and other ones I've been also attending, of like how like so many ideas are already coming to mind, especially like even just when you said KFC, obviously like food and beverage is one of the first one. Like I think like who hasn't organized an event and something's gone wrong with the food you've ordered? Too little or forgot a vegetarian meal or whatever it, I think like you're not an event if you haven't had a food disaster out there. And like I'm just thinking like so many times like the year around the next year, obviously people, especially if you're more community returning users, think of that, it's such an important part of that they take from one event to another. So really, how can you build that into your campaigns of saying, hey, yeah, we'll have enough food vendors this year at our next festival. It's like it's really like the idea of incorporating that. And especially like even with the feedback forms, do you also just like take or you see this working like maybe things that bigger things that went wrong, like something like running out of food or something? Or do you also sometimes take bits of a survey or feedback and saying, hey, we heard you with this is how we're acting against it?
100%. And I actually think feedback surveys, when you can get them to actually fill them out, right? That's the hard part. But when you can get them to actually fill it out and you get enough data that it's actually impactful and it's not, one in 1,000 people have filled it out, I think you can actually build in the positive effects from the pratfall effect, but also the endowment effect, right? Because if you are bothering to send out this feedback form, then you have to be willing to incorporate some of that feedback into the next rendition, right? And so I don't know if this year your exhibition carpet was like a really obnoxious purple and everybody hated it, and that was sort of your main piece of feedback on your survey that you sent out. In the next rendition of that exhibition, if the carpet is black, make some noise about the fact that, like, hey, based on the feedback survey from you guys, we changed the color of the carpet. Like, we get it. You hated it. We changed it. Our bad. And then that's both fostering that sense of ownership among the people who went last year to return again and buy tickets another time. And also, hey, we messed up. You're right. The carpet color was kind of a flop. Our bad, right? And it's sort of both of those together for the best result.
And you said there it's difficult enough to get surveys. Are there no behavioural science to get people to get more surveys? Is there like anything on that line?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. My favorite thing to do is just sort of have volunteers sort of out and about in the crowd, right? And just sort of offering up an iPad or a QR code, and then if folks do it on site, give them a thank you sticker or a voucher for some sort of drink or something like that, just to have them say thank you. People are motivated to do things when there's free stuff involved, right? But also I think the language again around the questions that you're asking and the calls to action if you're sending out a form in an email really matter, right? So instead of saying fill out this survey, right, which is bland and it's like, what are you doing for me? I don't care, I've done the event already, right? I'm tired. It's help us improve next year, right? Like little tweaks in your calls to action, I think, make a huge difference in the percentage of people that are willing to sort of go the extra mile and fill out that survey for you. Especially if they know that you're going to actually incorporate that feedback. It's not they're shouting into the void about the thing that upset them, right? Like you're listening and you've got a track record of implementing new things based on what your community has to say.
And I love how you're like bringing all the strategies you've kind of mentioned them before. So like we've got the language there, also working with it here, but also the making them be part of the event that you mentioned also before of like, okay, they haven't registered or anything yet, but making them feel part of that event next year already by saying improve it for yourself. Like I love how all these coming together. And you mentioned they have often something then. Do you believe in incentives? For this survey or for anything else then, like for registration, for maybe to complete the survey, for even to return next year, like what is your take on incentives?
Honestly, I do. And part of it is because I like an incentive. Like, yes, I'm all for free stuff. Like, give it to me. But I also think, and again, it depends on your audience and the kind of event that you're running, right? Like, if you're running, a 5-day medical conference and your giveaway is yet another branded pen, that's probably not going to have the same impact as like if you're doing a concert series and it's a special t-shirt that commemorates that concert and it's fans of the artist who are getting it for free when they fill out that survey, right? There are levels to everything, right? So I think it's just make sure that you, again, it comes back to who you're talking to and how you're talking to them and just making sure you're serving that audience the best that you can.
So do you have like a minimum standard of what an incentives needs to be?
If you couldn't tell, I'm annoyed by pens, branded pens everywhere you look. But honestly, again, no, it really depends on your audience. And I think for the right person, maybe a commemorative pen does the trick, right? That wouldn't be me, but that's okay. But it can also be as simple as, when we had our most recent community focused event called the Brompton World Championships, which is this sort of wacky bicycle race that took place in King's Cross in June. We had volunteers from the community in the audience with an iPad or with a QR code. And when somebody was willing to fill out, the on-site, how are we doing survey, they just got a nice free sticker that said Brompton World Championship on it. And folks seemed really happy with that because it was something they could stick on their Brompton bicycle or on their water bottle and just sort of, look back on it fondly every time they took out their bike or their bottle.
And yeah, like you said, it all comes back to, I think, of like getting to know your audience because everyone's incentives will be different, exactly. Isn't it? And sometimes the incentives depend on what you're asking someone for, isn't it too? Like if you're asking them to do a big whole job, right, you want to like give something bigger. But also we just come up to them, ask them to complete a form for a sticker for it, something they didn't exactly. Expect to it. It's not a biggie, is it?
I'm sure nobody would be unhappy if the reward for a survey was a Rolls Royce. Like I wouldn't say no, but also, who has those budgets, right?
I know. Yeah, that's why like sometimes I just like ask you because I many times hear that thing of, oh, we need to have really, we're not really going to do incentives because it needs to be a great incentives and we don't have the budget to send someone over to Australia on a all-inclusive 2-week holiday. And it's like, well, so we're just going to give them pens then. Also, it's like one stream or the other. It like doesn't have to be one or the other, but just curious to understand your intake on that.
And, part of that can also be ask your audience, right? Hey, like, what would you like? Like, what would incentivize you to stick around for that interview or fill out that feedback survey? Or, maybe it is just like, I want a free ticket for my colleague to come with me, some small things that you can do, or, a 2-week trip to the Bahamas. Why not? You've got the money.
You're definitely getting people filling in your surveys then.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. And I know just as we are drawing a bit towards the end here, but don't want us to go without touching on like post-event. Obviously we've got the survey, which kind of can be on-site or post-event, but what other things do you know? You've also got a close community, so I guess there's a lot of things going on for other events or to keep them engaged.
Yeah, I think another area to explore if post-event is where you're sort of struggling is the concept of social proof. And again, probably you already are implementing this or your audience is. It's just, looking into the science and tweaking what you're already doing based on what's backed by studies and research, right? So social proof is is the concept that, you know, people tend to look to other people to figure out what to do, especially if they're not sure what to do, right? And it's especially true as well if they identify with the folks that they see doing it, right? So, you know, the answer to the question when you're a teenager from your dad, like, if all your friends jumped off a cliff, would you? You know, the answer is, well, maybe, like, backed by science, maybe I would. But it's definitely true in terms of literally social media as well. You know, the more likes, the more shares, the more interactions that your post event content has, the more likely it is that people will continue to engage with it and view it as trustworthy and positive. And that's the same for, you know, shout about positive reviews after the event or testimonials from your speakers and presenters or talent that you have showing up. And honestly, just things like popularity, right? The amount, like, if you sold out very quickly, that's an element of social proof that you can lean on post event, right? That can take you to that next level. But yeah.
I personally myself a very big fan of social proof. It's one that I actually shout out a lot with everyone I work with, because at least doing websites, I'm a big fan of, like, social proof is so important for, you need it on your website. So you need to be gathering it also from your previous events. But also a lot of times when we are in this stage of also when you're building your next, so we obviously post event, but you're building your next one. You're like, you want that social proof from your previous event. And I at least work with a lot of people who struggle with, how do we get those testimonials? How do we get those reviews? Obviously, you've got the social part of what happened actually in the event, how we can push them. But basically, I'm just wondering if you do have any, like, tips or any inspiration of really how to get more people to share, like, positive feedback post event, and when, like, from your vendors, from your attendees, from your anyone involved in your event. Is there anything you've done down that line to really get more positive feedback that you can use for your campaigns?
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think you have to overcomplicate it, right? Like, I think you can just ask, right? Especially with vendors and suppliers, and just like, hey, if you had a positive experience coming to this event, or speaking at it or attending it, let us know. That will really help us. And genuinely, when people feel like they can help somebody else out, and it's something that they did enjoy, more often than not, they'll be willing to send you a couple sentences, right? It's, you don't have to be overcomplicated with it. And I think, you know, it also, once you have those testimonials, your job gets easier and easier, right? Because if I've seen that, I don't know, somebody that I look up to, if I see that Jennifer Lawrence has, you know, endorsed your event previously, and I went this year, and then you guys are asking me to give a testimonial. Well, I mean, Jennifer Lawrence did it last year. Yes, of course. Yes, of course. I'm going to give you a testimonial based on my experience this year. So, you know, reach out to the experts who you're leaning on to engage with your specific audience for those first testimonials. And then really it'll start to snowball. Um, if you'll allow me, another sort of example that has nothing to do really with events. It's sort of, you know, if you're trying to convince a bunch of sort of, you know, burgers and hot dogs sporty men to eat less meat for the environment, right? Maybe not go full vegetarian, but swap it out occasionally. The thing not to do is to, you know, just talk at them about how it's better for their health or better for the environment or whatever, because they'll sort of shy away from that because it conflicts with their existing worldview and how they see themselves. So instead, you need to get that social proof from folks that they look up to, right? You know, Olympian athletes, the Olympics are coming up, right? A bunch of them are vegan or vegetarian already. And just like getting them on stage at your event to talk about the benefits of why they chose to make that decision will go so much further than you lecturing that crowd about how meat is bad for them and bad for the planet, right? And then build on that. Those folks that you converted will then help you out next year with, you know, whoever else you're trying to talk to.
I love it. It's all a circular story going on here with the language that you're putting in there, with the social proof, with getting them coming back. And if I may, I do actually have a last cheeky question. Because just as you were
Go
talking
for it.
about the post event and, yeah, the people that came and all that, I was just wondering, always after events, we have a lot of people who haven't come to our event, people who don't attend. Obviously, depending, your event's free, paid, your attendance rate is going to be higher, or your dropout rate is going to be higher or lower. we all have people who don't come. Was just wondering if, from a psychology, from a behavioral science perspective, you do anything with the people who didn't attend to maybe re-engage them with your community or bring them back next year. I mean, the answer might not be no, but just cheeky question. Thought I'd ask you if you do anything with the people who didn't attend your events.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And I can also tell you that the biggest reason that some of our target audiences dropped off for, this year was just a matter of timing. We announced what we were doing a little bit too late for them to plan it into their schedule. So that's something that we're definitely taking into consideration next year. But those revelations don't come out of, post-event feedback surveys, because obviously they didn't take them. But it does come out of our social proof, right? Because we have a presence that folks are engaged with online. That's where they go to say, bummed that I couldn't come this year. It just, it was too late in the game for us. So, learnings come from everywhere. And again, yeah, as you say, everything's circular. So
No, and like you said there, it's so many times also just about making the ask, even with the testimonials and everything. It's just like really asking of like, why didn't you come, or why couldn't you make it, or why, or can you give a survey? It's really just really about making the ask, and sometimes we're just a bit all too shy to go out and reach out and ask. There are a lot of concepts, a lot of namings of all the strategies, everything you've talked to me here. Just wondering, is there anywhere like you would recommend people who are interested in like going, finding out a bit more? I know you said it's something that was your interest, that you have been learning about all this. Is there any resources that you would recommend to anyone who are looking into
yeah,
implementing?
definitely. I mean, I think there is a lot out there, right? And I definitely threw a bunch at you. So, thank you, Francesca, for letting me just talk your ear off. But I think the most important starting point is to, ask that question about, where are you struggling? Or, from our talk today, what area sparked your interest? And then just, do some Googling, right? I think that's the easiest place to start. And I am also more than happy to recommend, books or articles that helped me sort of figure out, cut through all the scientific language and sort of get to the layman's terms of all of this stuff. And again, I'm still learning too. So if you or anybody listening has, recommendations that you think that I should read more about, I would be so happy to hear them.
Thank you for that, Siri. And I mean, just a big thank you for everything you've just shared with me. Like, yeah, it's a lot, but it's been amazing. I loved how nicely you just made it and explained it, made it super relatable and very easy to understand. And I mean, like what you said there, I think most of the people out there listening are like myself, like you. We're all just also like learning on the job. So sometimes it just help like to hear the journey you've been taking and where you are right now, what you've been trying out. So just like massive thanks for sharing your journey with us. Anyone who wants to find out more about yourself, where do you hang out online? Where can people go find with you or maybe connect with you?
Yeah, I think the easiest place is probably LinkedIn. I don't bite. I'm very friendly. I love answering questions and, as I say, helping solve problems and things like that. So, if you're curious, if you're confused, let me know, and I'll happily chat with you, schedule in some time. But I think honestly, the audience that you have for this podcast, they genuinely are already using behavioral science tools. I think my main challenge for them is to sort of see if they can naturally identify one or two that they're already using, and then just tweak what they're doing, be a little bit more intentional and deliberate, and apply the science behind the principles and see if there's incremental change that really does make a difference. Plus, I think it does help with senior stakeholders if you can sort of throw some science at them in those meetings.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you just said that because that's something that, at least for me, it does sound very relatable. Because, yeah, as marketers, it's there, it's already there, it's part of the marketing. And sometimes, obviously, like you dive into it more or not, but it is there. And a lot of things, like you just said, a lot of things that you mentioned also on the call, it's just like they're things that you automatically do, but maybe not purposely, consciously thinking about it in this way. So it's just like so nice to have identified some of the areas that you mentioned there and say, okay, like how can I actually do this with a bit more purpose and a bit more mindfulness really behind to actually make an impact. So yeah, thank you for that challenge, for that call to action. Really, really appreciate that.
Of course. Gotta give a specific call to action at the end of this, right?
Wouldn't be a behavioral science episode if not. Siri, massive thanks again for joining me, and thanks for everything you just shared with us.
Oh, of course, Francesca. Anytime. It was brilliant. Thank you so much for having me.
Siri, thank you so much for everything you have just shared with me. That was such a great episode. I am so hyped, so inspired right now. And there are many takeaways which I'm going to be implementing into my marketing, into my events. And hey, now we've got these new episode types, which I'll be talking about this episode next week. I'll be sharing with you some of my feedback, some of my takeaways. So don't forget to tune in for that one. If it's already out, go listen to it. If it's not yet, make sure you subscribe to listen to that episode. See some of the things that have just come up in my mind, some of the action points that I'll be taking from it. And I hope you also get a lot of action points from this episode. As you saw, Siri just shared with you a lot of things you can do right away, a lot of tips, a lot of strategies. So go start implementing them and let us know how they go. I really do hope that you enjoyed this episode. I hope that you found it very valuable. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you can take the link and share it with a colleague or two who might enjoy it too, or paste it directly on your social profiles so your whole community, your whole network can listen to it. And while you are there on your socials, if you would like to connect with me, if you'd like to connect with Siri, you heard it, LinkedIn is the best place to connect with Siri. We'll be including her links also on the show notes. And you can also find myself there. I'm on the Events Cast or on Francesca Rodriguez. I would love to connect with you. Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, wherever you hang out online, connect with me. And if you have any requests, have any feedback for the show, I would love to hear from it. That is all for today's episode. I do hope you have a lovely day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are listening. I appreciate you for joining me. Appreciate you for choosing to tune in with me for this episode. And I hope to see you very soon in another one. Bye for now.